remind people about the shocking arrests in Queensland recently of activists using the pro-Palestinian slogan, "From the river to the sea," which are a serious assault on democratic rights, which the Labor premiers in New South Wales and Victoria are hoping to follow. They want to destroy the magnificent pro-Palestine movement, which is a key feature of any challenge to imperialism and the Trump-style forever wars. The movement must be protected. The movement is clearly not backing down, but repression is designed to have that chilling effect and to weaken our resolve. What we do as activists really matters. We can argue for what's necessary to strengthen the anti-imperialist movement, and we do that by proposing action, raising demands and tactics based on what we understand are the interests of those in society who can fight and who have power as part of a united front. This talk reflects on a previous successful struggle against the ban in street marches in Queensland. That was almost 50 years ago. So on the 4th of September in 1977, Queensland Premier Joh Bjelke-Petersen launched one of the most serious attacks on democratic rights in Australian history. "The day of the political street march is over," he said. "Don't bother applying for a permit. You won't get one. That's government policy now." The ban was rubber-stamped by his cabinet, put to state parliament 2 weeks later, no debate. But between September 1977 and August 1979, a right to march movement, initially called the Civil Liberties Coordinating Committee, rose immediately to challenge the ban. There were at least 29 organised rallies and marches, and you've got handouts on your seats, so I don't have to go through every one of them. And we reported on it with our fortnightly newspaper, The Battler, and there's examples of that on the other side of your handout. So 29 organised rallies and marches, many more pickets of government offices, disruption of press conferences, protests at watch houses and court hearings, protests outside the Bogger Road prison. There were 2 marches on Queensland at the border, solidarity marches in regional areas, Tourist Bureau Interstate had protests outside them, and even expats in London protested during this time. There were over 3,000 arrests of more than 2,000 people. Some of us were arrested more than once. I was arrested about 4 times. No, Ian Red-Tool had the record, and he would have been arrested at least 20 times. We were full-time protesters. The day of the political street march was certainly not over. Ironically, there had been few major rallies, but the government was concerned about the anti-uranium actions that were taking place, and they'd been denying march permits to the campaign against nuclear power. So there's 3 points I want to make in this talk: why Petersen actually tried to ban marches, what we did to defeat it, and today what we can take from these actions in our protests today. So in 1977, Queensland was in many ways very different politically from today. The population was just over 2 million, but it was very decentralised with only 1 million in Brisbane. The total Australian population at this time was 14 million. Now the National Party Premier, Joh Bjelke-Petersen, Joh to his friends, was seen as a bumbling politician who accidentally became Premier. Imagine someone worse than Barnaby Joyce, Richard Marles and Pauline Hanson combined. There was a joke that Bjelke-Petersen had less chance of becoming Premier than the communist Fred Patterson. Fred Patterson was the first and only communist to win a parliamentary seat in Australia, and he won the seat of Bowen in North Queensland. In a 1975 television interview, Premier Joh spoke openly about his Christian faith to a national audience. "You can read in the Bible for yourselves the story of God's love for mankind, for sinful human beings and his plan of salvation through faith in Jesus Christ. And he threatened divine retribution for sinful homosexual communities, Indigenous people who refuse to assimilate, and pro-choice activists. You can see why the Sunshine State earned the nickname the Deep North." His folksy manner, though, was useful in avoiding questions about his secret relationships with big business and how he was growing his wealth. He became very wealthy. Eventually became an embarrassment to the party as corruption was exposed in the police force and beyond. Now, federally, the coalition was in the ascendancy, led by the class warrior, the Prime Minister Malcolm Fraser, anti-union, bigoted, anti-abortion and intent on destroying Medibank. He was partner with the Governor-General less than 2 years before sacking the ALP government of Whitlam. So in the 1970s, unions covered half the working class and had recently achieved significant gains. But by 1977, actually, unions and social movements were actually in decline. But Fraser had not been able to push back the economic gains of workers. And in the context of declining profit rates, he faced an oil crisis and rampant 12.5% inflation caused through wars in the Middle East, which worsened with the February 1979 Iranian Revolution. So there are also similarities with today, and the Queensland Liberal National Party government today is likely looking again at the Bjelke-Petersen playbook. Now, big business mining bosses were keen for a rabid union-bashing premier in Queensland. Bjelke-Petersen saw himself as the vanguard for the right-wing bosses and politicians attacking unions, particularly over uranium mining. There was only one working mine, and that was Mary Kathleen in Queensland. Nationally, anti-uranium activists were already disrupting transport and the wharves. Electorally, Petersen felt safe. The infamous Queensland gerrymander, which favoured country electorates, guaranteed that the National Party would always be returned to government while that lasted. The State Labor Party was weak and conservative. Ed Casey, a right-wing Labor figure and leader from November 1978, was famous for declaring that Labor would not win government from the back of a paddy wagon. He was another well-known proud bigot. This meant that for the campaign of the Civil Liberties Group, an electoral strategy of subordinating the struggle to getting a Labor government elected was pretty much ruled out. State Labor politicians were banned from attending the rallies, but thousands of Labor Party members and voters were well to the left of the Labor leaders and ready to fight. The Right to March campaign had a task ahead of it to mobilise significant political and industrial weight in order to defeat Petersen. So it began as a student issue but became an issue for sections of the working class and produced a political ferment over a range of issues not seen since the movement against the Vietnam War. And many hoped the struggle would force the government out. So what happened? So 3 days after Petersen's ban, the first attempted march from the University of Queensland was blocked by hundreds of police. The march proceeded on the footpath to join a mass union rally in support of Ted Zappa in the city. The union organiser was facing criminal charges from the Bjelke-Petersen government. From October 1977, the rallies began in King George Square. Now, this square had been renamed. It was now called Fred Patterson Square in front of the City Hall. It was right in the city centre. We call it Fred Patterson, obviously. It was followed by attempted marches into the city streets. Thousands of police were brought in from across the state. The campaign became a hotbed of democratic discussion and organisation. At its weekly meetings in Trades Hall, we often continued until midnight. The first debates were over what strategy was needed to defeat the ban. The International Socialist members, and I joined them in 78, so I wasn't actually a member in 77. That's what solidarity used to be called in the 70s. They argued that by pursuing a militant course, marching, and if necessary getting arrested, the issue would become a focal point for anti-government sympathies. And this was supported by other activists, of course, who we caucused in what was called the Left Caucus. But excluded from that Left Caucus were two left-wing organisations that opposed the defiant march strategy. The Communist Party argued that the fight against the ban was a diversion. They said the campaign should hold indoor town hall meetings to build up public support and subsume itself into the movement against uranium mining. Yet the two indoor meetings that were held attracted fewer than the outdoor ones. The other group, Socialist Workers' Party, a predecessor of today's Socialist Alliance, argued to keep the demands at a civil liberties level that would not alienate people. The SWP leadership actually forbade their members from marching and being arrested. Their speakers at the rallies would urge us, go home now, you've made your point. There were other conservative reformists argued that the campaign had to avoid confrontation in order to win public opinion, and that the campaign should not fall into the government's trap, meaning that the Bjelke-Petersen government wanted a law and order issue for the forthcoming state election, which was to be held on the 12th of November in 77. For the IS, International Socialists, the ban was one aspect of the assault on democratic rights for those groups which most needed the streets to express solidarity and protest. That was like women's liberation, blacks and organisations of the working class. And we emphasised the central importance of the working class. We were and not opposed to the participation of others who were less radical, who opposed the marching. Everyone was welcome in the campaign, but we were opposed to a strategy which subordinated the demands, strategies and tactics of the campaign to those people who did not want to march, because that would mean the campaign would never have the illegal marches. Now, at this time, opinion polls were starting to show that a majority, 60% of Queenslanders, opposed the ban. So it seemed pretty clear that the key was to mobilise those passive supporters, or passive opponents of the ban, to become active supporters of the Civil Liberties campaign. Without an active movement, the government could have just ignored any passive opposition. Debates on whether to organise illegal marches preceded every rally, with the opposition to marching gradually dying down. Proposals to march were debated and voted on at every rally up until, I think, about March. Repeatedly, the rallies would vote to march. So we'd have these giant, absolutely huge debates in King George Square, Fred Patterson Square, and to decide whether or not we were actually going to walk down into the arms of the police, because we had to walk down these stairs and face arrest. But each time we won the vote. So to beat this form of repression would require this defiance, but also we needed to continue to fight for the demands against uranium mining and for workers', women's and gay rights. We were gearing up to highlight the Queensland apartheid against First Nations people. There was an apartheid system worse than South Africa in Queensland. If anybody wants to read about it, this is a pamphlet that was put out in 1976. And we were planning on with First Nations people, were planning on a militant march at the upcoming Commonwealth Games, which would be held in Brisbane. As early as 22nd of October, 5,000 people joined a Trades Hall endorsed rally against uranium mining. A majority voted to march, and that was when we saw 418 people arrested in what was still the biggest mass arrest in Australian history. That rally had an electric effect, similar to what happened in New South Wales recently, with an effect much wider than the demonstrators themselves. So we built a radical minority among workers for this. As part of IO's strategy, members actively worked to encourage union support and participation. We appealed to the leaders and the rank and file. We met with the trade union officials, and some helped us arrange speakers for union meetings. The November 77 elections could have destroyed our hopes, because the ALP and the Trades and Labour Council opposed the rally that was set up for the day before the election. And the campaign was attacked vehemently in the press. Yet more than 2,500 people marched, one of the biggest marches, in fact. Far from alienating public opinion, the angry rallies produced a historic 10% swing to the ALP in the Brisbane area. Now, between October 1977 and March 78, more than 100 rank and file and official union meetings were addressed by right to march speakers. I remember a group of us turning up at a metalworkers' workplace in the suburbs, walking into the tea room unannounced, explaining who we were. We got a good response, and they wanted us to stand on the table and address them about the issues. And they probably turned up at the next march. It was great. And it all paid off. By the 3rd of December, growing rank and file agitation from union members had pushed the Trades and Labour Council into calling a delegates meeting. That meeting voted decisively for Trades Hall to explicitly endorse the proposed rally and illegal march for the 3rd of December. The radicalisation driven by the campaign could be seen by early 1978 at the International Women's Day march, when a police officer threw down his cap to defend his girlfriend from other cops. But particularly on May Day 1978, about 20,000 people marched. May Day in Queensland is the same as Labor Day, and it's the first Monday in March. 20,000 marched that day, but there were 12,000 in the red contingent. They banned the communist contingents, but we all banded together and formed a red contingent led with right to march and anti-uranium slogans, and it was much bigger than the 8,000 in the official union contingents. So what happened in Labor mattered. In mid-78, the increasing discontent with the cowardly stance of Labor leaders led to the formation of a socialist left in the Labor Party around Senator Georges, who initiated a new series of meetings and really rebuilt a flagging campaign at this stage. And pressure from militant unionists continued to grow. Maritime workers threatened to strike if any of their members were held in the watch house. A 2-day strike by seafarers had forced the release of 2 union members who had gone to jail rather than pay fines for marching. And then in December, a maritime union mass meeting called on the Trades and Labour Council to call a rally and march in the name of the unions for a weekday, not a weekend, 7th of December 1978. A subsequent proposal was carried to call on affiliates to stop work so they could attend the rally. In a desperate move, Bjelke-Petersen offered a bribe. He said, I'll give you a permit, let's just march on Saturday. But the unions refused and marched on the weekday without a permit as planned. It was a huge national issue. Huge national attention. Federal Labor politicians, even from interstate, came to Brisbane so they could march. The Vice President of the ACTU, John Ducker, led the march into the police lines. Over 4,500 marched that day and 383 people were arrested. We kept records of the arrests, and at that march, over 70% of the arrestees were blue-collar workers. The TV cameras were everywhere, the journalists were everywhere, but the writing was on the wall for Petersen. In August 79, the police refused a permit at a Hiroshima Day march. That's the 6th of August every year. But within days, a permit was granted for Nagasaki Day, which is on the 9th of August. This was the first police authorised protest march since September 1977. The movement had not brought down the Queensland government, which is what we'd love to have seen, but in a major victory over the authoritarian premier, it had broken the ban on street marches. Legislation followed in 1992 after the ALP won government. The law was a dead letter. We had also contributed to preventing a nuclear power industry in Australia. So the lessons for today, the arguments for defying the law and looking to the power of organised workers were crucial for that struggle for the right to march. Workers don't have the same right to strike that they had in 1977, and that also must be fought for today alongside any action against repression. But we've seen there's a willingness in some sections. The Crown Casino cinema workers in Melbourne used health and safety laws to refuse to be part of that screening of Pauline Hanson's film recently in Melbourne. Organising rank and file teachers, university workers and public servants is going to be crucial in opposing government measures like the codes of conduct we've seen and the opposition to wearing affairs, the definitions that equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. Today, thousands more people recognise that there is an imperialist system that maintains Israel's genocide and the occupation of Palestine, but we need more organised socialists to prosecute effective arguments. I was a student in 77 and new to this kind of political organising. It was learning on the job. Apart from getting arrested regularly, some of us would often spend early mornings taking up offers to speak to workers in job meetings. The International Socialists was a brand new Marxist group on the scene. There were only 2 members in Brisbane, Carol and Graham. It was an anti-Stalinist, unorthodox Trotskyist group. The debates over the 2-year campaign clarified a lot of ideas and strategies, and on the basis of these arguments and serious effective strategy for the campaign to beat the government, by the time of the 1978 Easter Conference of the International Socialists, more of us had joined the International Socialists, and soon there was a branch. By 1980, we had 40 members, including a shop steward from the CPA, and a range of other organised activists, including people from what was called the Self-Management Group, which split at the time, and a number of them joined us. Some of them joined anarchists, and some of them joined us. Winning the right to march, and really the right to political dissent and organisation, built confidence for the next struggles to come. The Bjelke-Petersen government soon tried to smash women's rights further by tightening up anti-abortion laws. A campaign in 1980, which included illegal marches, defeated him. And then in 1986, defiance amongst doctors and patients prevented the closure of 2 abortion clinics. Power workers won a 37.5-hour week during the 80s. Had we not pushed back the ban on street protests, the opposite, the further repression, may have occurred. So for the moment in Victoria, we don't need a permit to march, but police can restrict protests. I was given this when I wore a mask at a rally recently, and outlines all the things the police can do when they designate an area in Melbourne. It's called a designated area, and they can tell you not to wear a mask or leave the demonstration, etc. Police in Victoria brutally attacked some protests, and new legislation is threatened. It matters to challenge the laws before they can be normalised and to prevent them if possible. There's actually no law in Australia that says we cannot assemble peacefully to protest, and there's actually a tradition of spontaneous assemblies which assert their rights. Since 1972, the Aboriginal Tent Embassy has maintained a protest in Canberra. The Constitution basically refers to the United Nations. But every state apart from Victoria, a permit is required, and in Queensland you need to give 5 days notice. In Tasmania, activists have to apply for a permit 12 weeks ahead of time. Repression has become government policy, and we must ensure that fighting repression collectively is our movement's policy. There is economic, political, climate, environmental crises worldwide, and with their divide and conquer tactics, the ruling class are intent of shifting the blame and the cost of the crisis onto working people and the poor. Capitalism, a system of violent oppression and exploitation that scapegoats migrants, uses extreme racism against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, and allows a 700% increase in Islamophobia. There should be no place for racism, misogyny, transphobia and homophobia. But the 21st century has ushered in a time of war. Yet, as we've seen, it is also a time of revolutionary challenges. And Palestine has educated new layers of activists and providing a focus for struggle. By arguing for defiance, we'll again be able to beat back the state and the federal government's offensive and strengthen ongoing movements against oppression, war and imperialism. There really is only one solution: intifada revolution.